Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show, coming to you this week from the UAE Men's Tour. Coming up this week is the discontinuation of Netflix Unchained, another nail in pro cycling's coffin. I'll be discussing that, plus looking at the Figueira Champions Classic, Almería, Murcia, Oman, the European Track Champs, Cyclocross, and Breggen's triumphant competitive return. This week in the world of racing, we learned that putting a stage finish 100 metres after a speed bump on a sprint stage is not really a great idea. Cycling just doesn't seem to help itself sometimes, does it? I wish Pascal Ackermann and everybody else involved in that crash a speedy recovery. We also learned that Breggen is back. I think we were all looking forward to her return to competition, but I can't have been the only one who had doubts as to whether she'd get back to her former level, and even if she did, whether that would still be enough to compete with the best. Well, I shouldn't have doubted. Class is permanent and the form, well, it's already there. She was the last rider to be dropped by Demi Vollering on stage 1 of the women's Volta Valenciana last week. More on that later on. And finally, we learned that there will be no more Unchained on Netflix. Later this year, ahead of this year's race, the third, for the time being at least, final series will be released. The good news though is that they haven't ruled out doing one for the women's race. Even if they do though, it's hard not to be disappointed by the news. Not just because we won't get to watch another series next year, but because of the wider implication of the decision. That the sport, or at least the series, wasn't popular enough with the viewing public for Netflix to deem it good for business to continue. A statement released by Netflix last week said, "After 3 seasons, we're naturally coming to an end of this cycle. We're very proud of the work we've done and of the public response to the documentary series, which has allowed us to offer a fresh take on this legendary competition." Well, they might be proud of the public response, but it sounds like there weren't enough members of the public actually watching. So according to French newspaper Le Parisien, viewing figures were average worldwide and disappointing in France. Now, the big hope was that this would help drive hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of new fans to our sport of cycling, just as it had done to Formula One with its original behind-the-scenes sporting series, Drive to Survive. But perhaps it was naive to expect anything even approaching that success. And number one, Drive to Survive was the original and came at a time when there's far less content to choose from, both on Netflix and other streaming platforms. And number two, well, Formula One was already a much bigger sport. There have also been similar series on golf and athletics, neither of which have come near to the success of Drive to Survive. There was also a small but important difference in structure between the two. Drive to Survive followed a season-long narrative, whilst Unchained focused entirely on the Tour de France, which in itself highlights one of cycling's big problems. Formula One is made up of 24 Grand Prix in which the same drivers compete. Pro cycling is made up of hundreds of races, many of which run concurrently, and if we're lucky, we'll get most of the best riders in the world on the start line together once a year. The cycling calendar and structure is tricky for a committed fan to understand, let alone somebody new to the sport. Now, I know what some of you will be thinking. Don't you dare say that the cycling model needs to change. It's just fine as it is. Well, I'm sorry, but that's exactly what I'm going to say. I mean, I too enjoy the season as it is. In fact, I love the way it ebbs and flows through early season stage races all over the world and onto slightly bigger stage races like Paris-Nice, then on to cobbles and the other major classics, and then on to Grand Tour season, etc., etc. However, it's also because I love the sport that I don't want it to die. I want to see it get better. I want more people to appreciate the drama and excitement that this sport can provide in spades. I'd love to see more younger fans getting into it, but I fear that that's not going to happen in its current form. There's been a lot of talk recently about One Cycling, which is a new group hoping to change cycling's model. They're hoping to give the teams more power and more stability. And the more that time passes, the more I hope it happens. It's in the team's interest to do everything they can to attract new eyeballs to the sport. But at the moment, there's only so much that they can do. Perhaps in the long term, they'll succeed. Either way, these next few years could be very interesting when it comes to the professional cycling landscape. Let me know your thoughts though. Do you disagree with me? Have I made a mountain out of a molehill? I mean, it's only a Netflix series stopping after 3 seasons after all. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Just before I move on, keep your eye out for a load of tech content that we've been shooting here at the UAE Men's Tour. That will be out soon over on GCN Tech. And also, thanks to everyone who gave us such kind feedback on the first episode of Zwift Academy. It really was a joy to watch those riders battle it out each day. Episode 2 drops this coming Saturday, and if you haven't already watched episode 1, I know I'm biased, but it's well worth catching up on. Okay, on to the racing now, and Sam Bennett took his first win of the season on stage 1 of the Tour de la Provence, and he backed that up 2 days later on the third and final stage. That day was 190 k's long, and it was ridden at a quite incredible average speed of 48.7 k's rate, which is over 30 miles per hour. Unfortunately, there was a crash in the finale. A small speed bump was there in the finale, and it was on the other side of the speed bump that Ackerman's wheel must have briefly left the ground. And it was enough to cause his wheel to slip, putting him off balance. There was nothing he could do to save himself from hitting the deck, and unfortunately, he took a few others down with him. Looking at Marijn van den Berg's Strava file, they were doing about 65 kilometers per hour at the time that crash occurred, which is a lot of lost skin. Anyway, back to the race. Those 2 big wins bring Bennett's career tally up to 69, and it means that he's won at least 1 pro race every year since 2013. A 13-year run. Very impressive. He didn't win the GC though, which was wrapped up on day 2. A strong front group formed over the climbs, and from it, Mads Pedersen struck out. His first big move came with 30 k's to go, and then from a small group, he followed a move from Mate Mohoric. Mohoric has a decent sprint on him, of course, but he was no match for Pedersen in the finale. Dane added 10 bonus seconds there to the others he'd already picked up en route, and the 1-2 on the day was actually the 1-2 on GC by the end of the race, with Fred Wright in third. In Portugal, Antonio Morgado was further underlining his potential, and indeed how blooming good he is already. Filippo Ganna had already gone on a pretty long range attack once they'd reached the finishing loops, but Morgado caught and passed him during what was a searing attack on the last main climb of the day. Nobody was able to follow his wheel, and he was soon enjoying a 40-second advantage over the chasers behind. Looked like a done deal, but once the chase got organised, it became a proper race again. Unfortunately, it was too little too late for the chasers though. Morgado held on to take his 2nd win of the season and his 2nd career win on home soil after the National Time Trial Championships last year. Behind him, Paul Magnier was another underlining his class. He won the sprint for 2nd despite the 2,500 metres of climbing that they encountered along the way. Good to see his former teammate Julien Alaphilippe attacking en route and also finishing in the top 10 too. That was his first outing incidentally for Tudor Pro Cycling. On to the women's Volta Valenciana now. Demi Vollering went into it as the hot favourite in what was her first race for FDJ Suez, and she more than lived up to the billing. On the final climb of the first stage, the Alta de Barque, she dropped riders one by one until she was alone. Over the top, she'd built up a healthy advantage, but behind her, Van der Breggen and Reusser combined to start reducing the gap. They were unable to bridge it completely though. Vollering crossed the line half a minute clear of Reusser in 2nd and Van der Breggen in 3rd. And that was the order of the GC when it was wrapped up 3 days later. 4th overall was Elisa Balsamo. She won the final 2 stages, but was pipped to the line by Misha Bredeveld on day 2. So no surprise to see Demi Vollering start the season with a GC win, but great to see Anna van der Breggen so competitive this early on. It's close to 3.5 years since she last competed, and I really thought it might take her a little longer to get back into the swing of things. We could have a real battle on our hands come the Tour de France Femme this July. Fingers crossed. At the Clasica de Almería, there was the usual chaotic finale. For whatever reason, it always seems ridiculously hard for teams to get their lead-out timing right in the closing couple of kilometres of that race. Regardless, fastest to the line was Milan Fretin. He got the better of Max Canter, who, despite what I've just said, actually had a really impressive lead-out from his ex-DS Astana teammates. For Fretin, that was his 3rd pro win, and it was also the 3rd for Cofidis so far in 2025. In Murcia the previous day, Fabio Christen had taken his first ever pro win. He's the older brother of Jan and timed his sprint to perfection, jumping the small group he was in that included Quintana, Del Toro and Aurelien Paré-Pant. Tim Wellens did a great lead out for his teammate Isaac Del Toro, so he must have been pretty gutted to see him roll across the line just 1 place in front of him. Anyway, Christen's win takes Q36.5 season tally to 5, which matches their total from last season. I'll quickly look back at Oman now, which finished last Wednesday. David Gaudu had been in the overall lead going into the final stage. He won the summit finish on stage 3 ahead of Adam Yates. However, Yates at a very high metronomic pace up Green Mountain. Gaudu came back once after being dropped, but he cracked with around a K to go. Yates pressed on all the way to the line to guarantee the general classification, but glued to his wheel, until he came around at the end at least, was Valentin Paré-Panthe. He took the stage win, so a great start for him at Soudal Quickstep. That was Yates' second successive win in Oman and his 9th stage race victory. Speaking of which, Corrections Corner. Last week I said Almeida had never won a stage race overall, which was completely wrong. He's won in Poland and Luxembourg in the past. Not sure how I managed to get it so wrong, but apologies for that. Okay, a very brief summary of the European Track Championships now. It's been away, I've not been able to watch everything, but there were a couple of standout performances in Zolder, Belgium last week. A new world record as well, in fact. Anna Morris in the individual pursuit, and not just once, but twice was it a world record. So Morris posted a 4:28.3 in qualifying and took almost 3 seconds off that in the final against the world hour record holder Vittoria Guazzini. The women's event went from 3 to 4 kilometres at the start of this year, so expect to see further world records set this year. As a sort of comparison, Morris's average speed over the 4Ks was 54.34 kph, whilst Chloe Dygert's world record of 3Ks, set in October last year, was 55.4. Very different though, as both from standing starts, so it takes a little while to get up to a cruising speed. Anyway, back to the action. Harry Lavreyson was back doing his thing. He took gold in the sprint and Karen. Josh Charlton beat Ivo Oliveira to take the men's pursuit title, but Great Britain were beaten by Denmark in the team pursuit in what was a very close final. Now you may remember Yuri Leitao from a couple of weeks back. He surprised the sprinter with a last-minute attack in Mallorca to take a win there. Well, he's clearly flying because he also won 2 gold medals in the championships in the points and scratch races, and Tim von Teutenberg can go home a happy man as well. He won in the Omnium in elimination. Great to see Lara Gillespie win the women's elimination. She was flying here at the UAE Tour last week and put that form to good use, as did Lorena Vibes, who won the Omnium, although that in part was due to Maddie Lynch crashing with 2 laps to go in the points race. Anyway, Vibes was part of a Dutch women's team who went home with 5 gold medals from 11 events. And just finally, in cyclocross, Lucinda Brandt won the exact cross in Saint-Nicolas on Saturday, but had to settle for 3rd yesterday at the X2O in Brussels. There, Sara Casasola took her first ever professional win in Belgium, and arguably the biggest win of her career so far. She's 25 now, but spent a lot of her early 20s focusing on earning a doctorate in maths. Multi-talented, that's for sure. In the men's, Michael van Torenhout took the spoils, whilst Niels van der Putte had won in Saint-Nicolas the previous day. The overall X2O series was won by Brandt and Ellie Isabit. Okay, that's a wrap for this week. Stay tuned for some videos coming from the men's UAE Tour here, and I'll see you again next Monday to wrap up the UAE Tour, the Volta Algarve with Roglic and Vingegaard, plus the Classic VAR and Tour des Alpes Maritimes. And don't forget, you can catch all of those races live on Discovery Plus and Max. See you next week.